cool stuff.
Yeah. So, okay, so at that point, it seems like they now have a resume, they've submitted it, and let's say they've been shortlisted for an interview, right?
Mhm.
I think this when I remember when I first started this space, like this is probably like when I actually got scary of like, oh, what do I like? Who is this person? What do I need to think about? What do I say? And I guess, at that, I mean, not that long ago, but how do I dress? Everything like that, right? So what's your suggestion for people who have that, they've passed that first stage and now they have this opportunity to get interviewed?
Yeah, great question. So just like with resume, I think the preparation that you do beforehand is so essential, not only because you want to make sure that you're presenting yourself in the best light, but also it'll really help the nerves as well. I totally agree when you're first getting started, or even like, even years after doing job interviews, they still get kind of scary sometimes. So the more you can really prepare upfront, the more comfortable you can feel and more relaxed, more confident. So things that you can really do, even like before starting to think about what kind of questions they might ask, you want to make sure that you've done your research on the company itself. So really, like, not just like the job description, but even like read up on the company, read up on, oftentimes with bigger companies, they'll have a career website, just like with Mindvalley. So read up on like what their culture is like, what kind of opportunities there are at Mindvalley, what kind of growth you can get out of the company, or maybe even what the company has done in the news recently. And why you want to really read that is because, inevitably, every recruiter is going to ask you if you have any questions. And if you ask a really basic question like, what is the company culture like? That just shows to us that you haven't done any research. Okay. Like, it's cute that you're asking, but, I would prefer you to come prepared with something a little bit more specific to show that you actually really do care. So when you can like do some research and like be able to even say like, oh, okay, like Mindvalley recently created this podcast about like working remotely. So that could be something that you could ask in the interview. Like, how are you like helping all of your employees, work remotely in this time of coronavirus? It seems really interesting. Like specific questions that can go deeper into whatever role you're interested in, or to learn more about the culture in a deeper way. Apart from doing your research on the company, obviously, there are some very common questions that you're almost always asked. The most basic and most common of all is probably just, tell me about yourself. And I know like some candidates sometimes get like, a little frustrated. They're like, oh, like, I'm 4 interviews in and they're still asking me a super basic question like, tell me about yourself and why you're interested. Like, just roll with it, because usually it's a different person interviewing every single time. Maybe they didn't have necessarily a lot of time to prepare in advance because they're coming in and out of meetings or back-to-back interviews. It's all blurring together. So make sure that like, you prepare for that like 1 minute or like 2 minute pitch about yourself. And really, make sure that you come off not just like showing like what your personality is like, but also really highlighting why you're the best fit for that particular role, or why, you would make a really good fit at the company as a whole. Apart from that, also like, making sure that you're really clear on what your strengths and weaknesses are, I think is always a really great way to prepare for interviews, because inevitably they're going to ask you about those either directly or maybe even indirectly. They might try to see like, what have been your past failures, or, what have been your biggest successes? And those can often be linked to your strengths and weaknesses. So making sure that you're very clear on those can kind of help you. And then I think, another way to really prepare is a lot of times in interviews, they'll ask you what we call like behavioral questions. Like, tell me about a time when you failed, or tell me about a time when you had to deal with a crisis in a team, or a conflict in a team, or tell me about a time where you had to stand up for yourself. These sort of like situational kind of questions. So you want to make sure that you come prepared with like a few stories that you can really draw from. And you don't have to come up with a different story for every single fathomable question that they could ask you. It's more like going back to your resume and looking at, okay, what are like, 1 or 2 of the really key like experiences where I feel like I achieved a lot, or I did a lot of really cool stuff. I worked on this really incredible project. and make sure you know that story that comes from that experience like inside and out. So that way you can really tailor that story to fit a variety of situations. So one really powerful, amazing story could be a blanket cover for any sort of question that they could ask you. So that way you don't have to worry about like memorizing 1,000 questions that they could potentially ask, but rather just like, how can I tailor it to any situation?
Cool.
Yeah.
Wait, let me just ask you a question. So
Okay.
you talk a little bit about, talking about your strengths and talking about your weaknesses, right? So I think we all kind of know how to talk about strengths, but I'm curious, how do I present my weaknesses, in a way that I don't look weak? I just want to tell you this is, my weaknesses, right? But how do I kind of put it in a positive way, like such that you will receive it positively?
Yeah, I think weaknesses, as well as like whenever they ask you about your failures, it's kind of the same thing, right? Like you don't want to sort of give a very generic answer like, I'm a perfectionist, because then that makes you sound not very genuine, right? Every time I hear that, I just feel like, okay, I'm done with the interview. I'm done, goodbye.
Yeah,
No, with a lot of these questions, like the reason why they ask is they want to see if you're self-aware. So it does, benefit you to be very honest and open about what your weaknesses are. How you can spin it in a positive light is show like, not only what your weakness or what your past failures have been, but also how are you working on them now? Or how are you addressing them now? What is like your action plan to work on it? If we can see that, like you're able to like not only be aware of what your weaknesses are, but you're going to take ownership over it. You're going to be proactive over like filling the gaps of whatever that is. That shows to us like, oh, okay, like, we could potentially trust them, even if like maybe one of your weaknesses seems like it's kind of in direct conflict with this particular position that we're looking for. Maybe they still can like sort of be trained or like coached on how to overcome that issue.
Cool, thanks.
Hey, this is CS from More Money Malaysia. We are a platform dedicated to helping Malaysians like you make smart financial decisions. And the way we do that is through providing you with actionable advice, such as the video you just saw, right? But we're not here just to become your intellectual entertainment. We really do want to see you succeed, because we want to see you live that ultimate life that you've always dreamt of, right? And in order for us to do that, what we've decided to do is we want to help make it easier for you by providing different types of rewards throughout the months. So make sure you check out the description below, click on that link and see what type of reward you might be able to qualify for by taking action right now. And if you have any other questions about any of this, feel free to contact us wherever you find us. Take care.